Welcome to episode 2. In episode 2, I'd like to follow on from episode 1 and make a sideways step before I arrive at Plato and discuss Socrates and on to Aristotle. I'd like to go sideways and I'd like to look at this question of meaning. How does meaning work in our lives? How do these questions, which force us to create and construct systems of belief of how meaning works? Now, what do I mean? I suppose part of it, if you look at ancient Greece or you look at contemporary life, what is the role of a belief in the way that we, as human beings, orientate ourselves in the world? There is a kind of illusion, a common misunderstanding that we live in a world which is post-belief. It's the age of mythological supernatural creatures is somehow a relic of a bygone era. It would be nice if that were true, but it isn't true. There's very little evidence to say that human beings today believe less than human beings in the past. In fact, when you really question this issue of belief and how belief helps us orientate ourselves in the world, you end up talking about our relationship to the things we do not know. Now, this is, for me, an absolutely fundamental question. What is it I don't know? It seems a fairly trivial question because the simple answer would be tons. I don't know, for example, while I'm speaking to you, what's going on at this particular instance everywhere else in the world. I have a rough idea. I don't know tons and tons of individual level details of the contingencies, the accidents, the situations, the thoughts that pass through the trillion creatures and human beings in this cosmos. I don't know that. I have no access to that. In fact, one could argue, without stretching the point too far, that the unknown is such a fundamental constant in our lives. It's there when we think about what happens at death. It's there when we think about the questions of the ultimate meaning of life. It's there when we find ourselves tricked and caught by the complexity and difficulties of our own emotional life. That the unknown is something that we can never fully overcome. It would be nice to have a body of knowledge in which you can answer questions and cover over and remove what you might call the unknown. And here I think I come to a fundamental principle of this creative and philosophical work. The unknown never disappears. At one level, the unknown simply represents everyday contingencies, accidents. The fact that as I sit here and talk, I'm not aware of even the person in the room next door, what thoughts are going through their head. I don't have access to that information. Now, I know I've said that, but it's an important point. We tend to think contingency, this accidental level, is just a question of developing the right model of knowledge, and then we will have all the answers. It's a very powerful desire to have a complete body of knowledge, to have an answer for everything. Now, the difficulty comes is that when we live our day-to-day life, we live in this contingent field. We have to confront situations where we don't have all the evidence, all the facts, all the knowledge. We don't quite know what is fully going on. And that is a fundamental feature of our everyday life. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And that's a fairly uncontentious day-to-day truth. But what's interesting about it is that we don't simply remain with the unknown. If we remained with the unknown and tried to put the unknown as a variable or as a factor into our day-to-day thinking, how would it affect the way that we thought? Yes, we don't know what someone's thinking, so when we try to anticipate a situation, how much is based on our assumptions, how much is based on a belief that we've roughly got the right idea, when we pull together various different ideas and we form some knowledge or some idea of knowledge. Now, I don't want to diminish this type of thinking. I think, in fairness, most of us do it most of the time. We're confronted by so much that we don't know. And in fact, the fundamental question is, we don't know the ultimate cause or purpose of the cosmos. We have no knowledge of it. It would be nice to say that it's an uncontestable fact, that I can state that the purpose or the meaning of the cosmos is this, but I know clearly that if I go to different parts of the world, I speak to different people, they will each come with a different formulation of what that ultimate meaning is. Truthfully, there is no agreement amongst all human beings, and perhaps all higher order intelligent species across the whole cosmos. There would never be an agreement on what the ultimate formulation of the meaning and the purpose of the cosmos is. That kind of is a huge obstacle. It's a desire that many people have recognized is built into our character, the desire for knowledge, for understanding. Yes, it has a purely practical dimension, because if we have knowledge of a situation, we understand the mechanics or the processes or the structures, we can orientate ourselves and live and cope. But I'm not simply just talking about the practicalities. Our emotional life opens up almost an infinite depth or an abyss of issues and complexity when we come to understanding and having knowledge. Yes, we can formulate models based on neuroscience which would explain some of our emotional life. We can formulate understandings and knowledge based on evolutionary theory and biology. I have no problem with them. The bottom line, however, is that none of them ultimately answer the deepest questions. They attempt, and the attempt isn't worthless. The attempt is actually very, very important to us as human beings, to try to formulate an understanding of what the whole cosmos means, why we exist, why we're aware of ourselves in strange and peculiar ways, why we feel the way that we do, why we experience the world, including the question the pre-Socratics asked about why does the world exist in the way that it does. These may be questions that some of us think are idle and pointless, but they do haunt us. And they haunt us in the way that our own mortality haunts us. What is the meaning of your life, for example? If you know that at one point you will be dead and you will be gone, are all your actions and the meanings and significances to your actions, your kindnesses, your generosity or your cruelties, are they all wiped out when you die, so ultimately it never really mattered? Is everything to do with meaning just something which is a time-bound issue? That we have meaning in the world, but it's just bound to situations, and situations are in flux, they appear, they disappear, and the meaning is relative to those situations, so ultimately no fundamental meaning. For some people that may feel adequate enough for them to orientate themselves in life, because there is a purely practical question. But for many people, and perhaps the vast majority of people and human beings in particular, are very vocal about this. The question of why the universe is the way it is brings us into the realm of religion. It brings us into the realm of this desire to formulate an understanding of the ultimate root and purpose of the cosmos. But here's a paradox. If I live in the Christian West, I might formulate this ultimate question in terms of Christianity and the Christian God. In fact, if I grow up in a particular place in the Christian West, and I may not have any Christianity around me whatsoever. Secularism, humanism, for example, are perfectly legitimate systems or forms of belief. I don't have to have a God to have meaning in my life. People can find meaning in all kinds of different ways, and ultimately you might, if you believe very strongly in the natural order and the value of the natural world, you may want to go for something much more pagan, in the sense that the natural world itself is imbibed with a sacred element and it has a purpose, but it may not be obvious. So here's the question. If it's not obvious and it's not given to us, we don't wake up one day and we suddenly know what the ultimate purpose of the universe is, and we have that answer. Like the woman in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the comic take on the Earth being a huge supercomputer trying to find the ultimate question of the meaning of life is quite apt here. It's a very, very profound thought that a whole planet and a whole planetary system is required in order to answer that question. And that woman who's sitting in a cafe in Rickmansworth finally formulates the answer, the question, in fact. And that's when the Earth is destroyed. Leaving aside the comic dimension of that, it is almost absurd that any particular person can appear and say, this is what the ultimate purpose is. Because there is a deeper question. Why is it's not available, for example, to every single human being as a birthright? Why is this ultimate answer of the purpose of life not visible and easily accessible to all of us? Why only a particular group of people, or why a particular individual? I think of Molière's play Tartuffe about the corruption of a religious person working in a household. The drama of the story relies on the fact that the family household assume that this type of privilege and this type of privileged access to this ultimate truth is only in a handful, only available to a handful. And you can see that this in itself creates a massive amount of corruption and problems. Is corruption necessarily built in to this whole approach, that only a handful of people have this magical answer to the meaning of life? Is that an inevitable outcome? You just have to look at the fundamentalists, the pastors in various parts of the world, independent of whatever religion they hold. If they make the statement or the claim that they have a privileged access to this secret, to the ultimate meaning of life, and you believe that they do, then you're lining yourself up for what you might consider to be a necessary corruption. I'm not assuming when I say this that everyone who believes that is evil or corrupt themselves. What I'm saying to you is that as a human being trying to cope in the world, if I meet someone who claims to have the answer, and I, in my foolishness or in my own uncertainty and in my own desire to find an answer, but really I haven't pursued it, or I have no idea how to, I say, oh yes, I can believe that. I can believe that one person out there or a handful of people can have this privileged answer. So my contention here is that isn't necessarily a fraudulent move. It isn't necessarily the desire of someone to corrupt and just gain power. Clearly, it's so easy for that whole process to occur, to rely on an authority, someone or something or text that has this privileged access to some ultimate answer. I mean, we would all love it. Would we not? Wouldn't we love it if I could present you with a very, very simple series of answers? here's the meaning of life, this is the way the universe works, end of story. Let's get real, let's just tune into the way that the universe works, and our everyday life will get more interesting and things will happen. When someone says that and they follow it up with a huge explanatory framework, they might posit gods, they might not posit gods, for example. These ultimate statements of what something means, and the cosmos in particular, or what our life means, these aren't casual, free statements that anyone should lightly throw around. I mean, the crazy thing is, even for those people who claim, yeah, there's no God, that's all a load of rubbish, the world comes out of a void, out of a nothingness, science shows that there's nothing there behind it, it's random particle movement, and that's the ultimate explanation. That in itself is an unwarranted leap. It leaps into a dark and unknown place. And what do I mean when I say it leaps into a dark and unknown place? In the same way that someone who makes a statement to try to cancel out, let's take a very simple example. If I want to cancel out an authoritarian religious group or a person who claims to have ultimate access to the purpose of life, you listen to me and I will tell you what that purpose is. You keep me in good money so I can support, and I will provide you with answers. Okay, that for me is ultimately deeply, deeply dishonest and deeply, deeply corrupting of our desire for ultimate answers. And why do I say that? Am I attacking religion? No, I'm not attacking religion, because if you look at religion as a frame, as a skeleton, ultimately it tries to draw you near to these questions. If you read the mystics of a religious tradition, or even the heretics of a religious tradition, you will find their take on the purpose and the point of religion tends not to be authoritarian. It tends to talk a lot about the significance of what we don't know, the unknown. In fact, the very term a mystic probably captures what I'm talking about here. To be a mystic, or to claim that you have some mystical access, is not that you have a privileged body of knowledge about the nature of the cosmos. It's not that you can come to me and I'll tell you how the cosmos works and how it fits together. No, that's rather simplistic and dishonest. What it actually says is that the unknown isn't some arbitrary, everyday, contingent unknown that you can develop a good system of knowledge and you can overcome it. That's not what the unknown is. The unknown is built into the very root of our cosmos and our experience. It's right there at the base of everything. And a mystic, or the whole concept of mysticism, is the recognition that there is an ultimate, unassailable, permanent mystery about the nature of the cosmos. Why we're here, what we're doing, what the ultimate purpose is. So in many ways, mysticism within religion tends to be quite heretical. It moves in a way that challenges orthodoxy. If orthodoxy is, yes, there's a God, and God says you must do this, and God says you must do that. Now you can separate out the various different levels of purely human-made artifice versus these ultimate questions. If a preacher came to me, doesn't matter what religion they were, and said to me, I've got a code of conduct for how you should conduct your life. If you conform to this code, you will have a happier life, for example. That may or may not work for an individual person. It may not work for one person who follows a particular religion, may work for someone else, etc. There are people who look at religion and recognize within it lots of ethical codes, codes of conduct, behavioral models, and so on. That's a very, very human, everyday issue. But you cannot, or one cannot claim on the basis of those types of code that one has access to the ultimate answer of the meaning of life. The idea that it's attributed to God, a supernatural being, a being that's not visible and only accessible to a handful of people in very rare moments, a being that requires a belief in that being in order for that being in some way to exist. I mean, I'm not sure whether you've ever discussed theology rather than argued with people who are theological, but certainly when you look at everyday functional religion, lots of people who are everyday religious say, oh, God says this, God says I must do this. But these are really, really deeply, deeply problematic. Religion has a purpose, but its purpose is actually connected to providing some frame of conduct and understanding. But the biggest issue is that if you attribute it all to a knowable God, here's a paradox for you. If I assume that God is knowable and knowable through the Bible or through the Quran or through some other scripture, then I'm claiming knowledge which I don't think there is any evidence or anything that can justify that on not simply rational basis. I'm not simply saying this is an attack on religion. I think we have to see this as a well, let's discuss how we could approach this so we don't negate the desire for those securities, but we see them within their relative context. So let's just take an analogy. You walk into an art gallery, and when you walk into an art gallery, there are a group of people, and there's an expert standing by a very famous, let's say, Picasso picture. And you look at this picture, and you're struck dumb by it. It's amazing. It grabs your attention. You feel it has some real depth and profundity, and you want to learn more about it. Why was it painted? What does it mean? What does it say about human beings? And so on. You're just fascinated. Picasso may not be such a good example because his pictures may not lend themselves, but let's assume that the artist has that profundity in this instance. And there is a small group of people, and there's an expert standing there who tells you what the picture ultimately means. They give you some explanation about the artist, what the artist was trying to do, because they've gleaned this from the artist's notebook, and they tell you that the picture means, and they give you some kind of explanation. But if the meaning can be given in a description, why draw the picture? If there's something in the picture of real meaning, then it has to in some way remain outside of the reach of any explanation. If it's superficial, if a work of art is ultimately superficial, trivial, you can explain it, you can paraphrase it, and actually that's pretty much all there is to it. A very good example is conceptual art. Conceptual art is almost a parody on paraphrasing concepts and works of art and how they work. But without getting distracted by that discussion, what if that picture ultimately does say things of deep and profound meaning, but it doesn't give you the ultimate answer? You look at it and you think, wow, that's amazing. That says this about people. I mean, a better example would be a novel, right? We take the works of Dante, for example, and you study the Inferno, and you think, this is amazing. It provides me with all the answers of human nature about the scheme of how human beings behave, based loosely on the idea of corrupted love, taken from Thomas Aquinas, and so on. And you think, wow, they're all my answers. They're there. Dante also drew on the biblical Judaic-Christian tradition as he did on Greek. And you think, wow, that's what I need. It's got my answers. If I want to understand why someone's behaving that way, I go to Dante, I look up the type of person he or she is, and there you have my answers. But the problem with that approach, which is, if you like, where we are with religion, is that it's not that that answer is worthless. It's not that what Dante has to teach us is relatively only partial. It's that it is ultimately a work of art. It's a construction, which means that if you go to another work of art, you will find a different and a significantly, subtly different interpretation and meanings inside there. So, for example, take the two canonical writers in Western Europe, Dante and Shakespeare. They both provide an image of human nature, but they do it in very different ways and reveal very different and subtly different, but connected, for anyone who studies them, understanding of human nature. And in fact, the richness and depth of our canonical writers is because you can keep on going back and finding new meanings. But the problem here, and the question is here, is that they're not providing you with an answer. Shakespeare or Dante perhaps more, but Shakespeare certainly does not want to say, here's a substitute for an ultimate explanation, here's a scientific explanation of human nature. Because one thing that you can be sure about Shakespeare, for whatever issue you might have with Shakespeare, is that he portrays human beings confronting the fundamental unknown nature of the universe, the unknown motivations in some people, the unknown purposes that we're put to. The presence of ghosts aren't simply a plot device. They also present this mystery to us. Were they real? Were they psychological, etc.? What's the relationship of Hamlet? These aren't answers. They are questions. And that's ultimately what art does. But then you say to me, oh, but that makes life more complicated. I don't want more questions. I want answers. So I seek it out in a scientific textbook on biology or on chemistry or physics or in genetics or evolutionary theory. That's a very popular thing to do. Or I seek it out in religious texts. That's also still very, very popular. But what happens is if science is a perspective, an interpretation of the cosmos, what if it makes certain claims about parts of reality, what you might call the middle order parts of reality, the part of reality which enfolds our everyday life, but which falls below? If you try to go below it, you end up in the realm of what was traditionally called metaphysics, or, if you want to take a popular term, the supernatural. It ignores the metaphysical or tries to in the supernatural, but it can't. Because any attempt to form an ultimate explanation has to make a claim about the way the whole universe hangs together. So whether you go the scientific path and you treat scientific truths as the only path possible, or religious ones where you remain trapped within a fixed text, my inclination is that we have to stop confronting each of these traditions against each other. Science, the power of science, is that the middle order of our reality, the level at which our everyday life emerges, takes great benefit from having a scientific approach to it. What's the structure of a cell? What's the structure of the food we eat? How does the universe hang together? These kind of explanations about the structure and causes at a middle level of our existence are really deeply and profoundly important. To learn more about genetics and the ultimate and DNA, for example, and the structure of cancer. This is not something that's comparable to anything that you find in most religious textbooks, because the religious textbook has no method to really tackle this level of reality. Religious textbooks are, if you like, an attempt to provide you with an ethical frame for the whole of reality. That's why the two systems aren't ultimately incompatible. But the real problem is which religion or which scientific model or paradigm, what's the ultimate one that we should all accept? For science, we won't do badly if we take science as a good system to and perhaps the best system at the moment to deal with this middle level of reality. But when we come to ultimate questions, there is no privilege either for a religious authority or for scientific truths. The structure of our genes does not ultimately explain why genes exist in the first place, although evolutionary theory will provide you with what looks like a metaphysical frame. It's not really giving you a metaphysical frame in the traditional sense. It's trying to pretend it's giving you a scientific explanation. But ultimate explanations of why things work and the meaning of things always touches these deeper questions. So we come back to the same problem. We have all these systems of thought, these traditions, we have all these arguments, who's right. But if our thought and ultimately our approach to reality has a creative element, we have to formulate things in order to find truths, then what happens if art provides us with a much more adequate model to understand perhaps that if at the root of existence, we have a mystery, the ultimate questions are mysterious, but that doesn't stop us from asking. But every attempt to respond to that mystery may lead to some body of knowledge or some concept or some image. This is probably where the birth of religion came from, and also tackled where the birth of science came from and our arts. But what happens if we should treat each of them as part of a prism? If you think of a prism where light shines through a crystalline structure, depending on which face you show, which angle you put it through, it will reveal different colours. And what happens if we don't fight these different faces? We don't turn the prism around and say that's the truth, the other perspectives are irrelevant. What we recognise is that all of the perspectives contribute towards a question. That what we are ultimately trying to do is deepen our grasp of the reality of our own inner lives, of the cosmos, how everything hangs together, how meaning works. And in that process, we have to perhaps start recognizing that we create in order to find the truth. And each work of art, so we're back to our gallery again. Imagine we're in a metaphysical gallery and you walk through one gallery and you watch all these pictures which give explanations in terms of a Christian God or an Islamic or a Jewish God, the Abrahamic faiths. Or you say that's amazing, it attempts to capture all the various threads in our life and give a big explanation. And then you think, wow, that's very satisfying. Then you walk to the next gallery and you find you reach the scientific gallery. And in the scientific gallery, we aren't necessarily dealing with ultimate, theological or mythical creatures. We're talking about structures. So if you think about the pre-Socratics, we're asking the question from what's the ultimate substance, the ultimate stuff. Out of that, we are generating an image and an understanding of the mechanics, the causes, the structures, the flows, the forces that make up our cosmos. And then you think, wow, that really works, but there's no God here. It's all nothingness behind these ultimate rules or laws of nature. There's really nothing there, it's just there. And you might find that dissatisfying. So then you walk along to another one and you pick up a novel by Balzac or by you read Dante, or you go to Jalaluddin Rumi, the Sufi poet, for example, or you read a text in Buddhism and you think, wow, this provides me with a different kind of explanation. It shows me how things could hang together. You'll never satisfy and find that ultimate answer, because every attempt to formulate a truth about the nature of our cosmos ultimately must answer the question, what is the point of everything? But if, as I've been saying in this video, that question is the most contested and contentious one, then is it ultimately doomed to failure? Is it ultimately whatever your subjective preference is? Yes, I prefer explanations in scientific terms. I have no real interest in theological, so I'm going to reject all of them. But all you're doing is you're fixing in your mind what the right framework is. And that is different from the question of why should you select one? Okay, the obvious response would be, well, I have to, because I have to live in the world and I have to have some kind of way of orientating my own actions and understanding about what my own actions mean. Agreed? But what happens if the universe and the cosmos is creative? Not just sort of superficially a bunch of watercolours being done here or there, but has a deeply, deeply creative dimension. So, for example, I have to make something in order to try to uncover or discover a potential truth. I might put that, and this is true for art as well, I will create something in order to display that truth, but the meaning and the sense of that truth is connected deeply with a whole bunch of unstated assumptions and unstated questions. So I will never arrive at a final answer, but I will have a process, a deeper process. Now, what do I mean by a deeper process? Well, if you look also into things like meditation, contemplation, and the creative act itself, and I'm talking about a Beethoven rather than pressing a few buttons on a laptop and generating music. I'm talking about a very, very profound engagement with the creative act itself. What they all seem to suggest is that they don't arrive at an ultimate form or answer, but they display a truth to us as human beings about what the universe could mean and how it falls together. Your response to me might simply be, well, I don't care about what could be. Give me something more than that. So to end this video and perhaps to go into the next episode, let me just suggest that the cosmos is itself an attempt to answer the question that we are answering. What happens if every creature born, if every theory formed is an attempt to answer a question that lies at the root of the cosmos? What happens if at the root of the cosmos, this mystery and the desire to respond to this mystery by creating a cosmos in order to see what might be the meaning of things and how meaning works? What happens if these questions and issues are actually built into the fabric of the fact that we have a cosmos? Well, the most obvious thing you might say is that if you're very theological, you'll say, are you suggesting that A, there isn't a God, or if there is a God, that God doesn't know everything? Well, that's a question to answer on another day. But what I'm suggesting is that out of the unknown, as a response to what I do not know, as a human being living here, and perhaps as the cosmos as a whole, I have to create something in order to try to work out what things mean. I'll give you a simple example, and this is perhaps a very common analogy. If you want to understand someone, you have to see their actions, and their actions themselves reveal something of who or what they are. If someone doesn't do anything, and you think, oh, that person's great, they're kind, but suddenly you put them in a difficult situation, and they display behaviors which shock you, and you say, oh, that's not really them. Is it really not them? Or does it reveal something about who or what they are? Now, what happens if that analogy is a really interesting way to understand the whole cosmos? That the cosmos at its root is an exploration of the question of what am I? What is this? There's no answer there. But in order to formulate an answer, to see the truth of what this all is, the world and a cosmos has to be created or grows, because I don't want to put a creator in the root here, but it grows, and that works like a sign, a reflective sign, like a mirror. And that mirror reflects back upon itself, upon the mystery, and says, and answers the question, well, depending on who you talk to, yes, it reveals an omniscient God, or yes, it reveals a nothingness, or yes, it reveals a complete malevolent being, or yes, it reveals none of those things. It reveals the mystery itself is still infinite, but in cancelling that mystery and trying to form a cosmos, it reveals a relative truth about the ultimate meaning of life. It's certainly worth thinking about.